faculty members, respected colleagues, and dear students. It is my pleasure to welcome you all to today's lecture. And also it is a privilege to introduce our speaker, Dr. Lidarev, an expert in Asian security and international relations with a particular focus on China-India relations and geopolitics of South Asia. Dr. Lidarev is currently a visiting research fellow at the Institute of South Asian Studies, National University of Singapore, and also serves as a visiting lecturer at the Sophia University St. Clement Odersley. He received his PhD in International Relations and Political Science from King's College London in 2021. His doctoral research focused on the China-India territory dispute. He also holds a master's degree in International Affairs from the Elite School of International Affairs, George Washington University, and a bachelor's degree from Bath College. Over the years, Dr. Lidarev has been associated with several leading research institutions, including the Observer Research Foundation, Institute of International Relations, Prague, and London School of Economics, IDEAS. His work primarily examines the Asian geopolitics, China's foreign policy, and regional security dynamics. Dr. Lidarev boasts rich think tank experience, having held visiting fellowship at different think tanks, including United Kingdom. He also served as an advisor at Bulgaria's National Assembly since 2014 to 17, even at the graduate teaching assistant at the Defence Academy of the UK from 2018 to 2019, and associate featured editor of E-International Relations from 2015 to 16. He has participated in various leadership professional training programs, including as young leaders in 2016, 2017 at the GlobeSec Forum, Young Professional at the Tatra Summit 2018, and Merits Young European China Talent 2018. At the Mercator Institute for China Studies and New Security Leader 2021 at the Warsaw Security Forum. So today, he is going to present on the US-China competition in South Asia, implications for India. The presentation focuses on the growing strategic competition between the United States and China in South Asia and its implication for India's regional position and policy choices. It analyzes the evolving engagement of Washington and Beijing across the region, with particular attention to the two key states, that is Pakistan and Bangladesh. China's expanding political, economic, and strategic presence in South Asia has encouraged the United States to strengthen its engagement with the region. However, the long-term sustainability and intensity of this renewed American involvement remains uncertain. This evolving dynamics places India, though it's a traditionally a dominant regional power, in an increasingly complex strategic environment that affects its relation with neighboring states and its broader regional strategy. So the lecture shall address the core issues, that to what extent the US-China competition influenced the strategies of South Asian states, and how has China responded to the United States' growing engagement in the region, as well as how does India perceive the evolving US-China rivalry and its own role within the geopolitical context. So, drawing on American and Indian sources, the presentation shall also examine the Chinese scholarly and policy debates regarding the geopolitics of South Asia, providing a broader perspective on the regional strategic landscape. So again, I welcome here Dr. Lidarev, and shall we begin?
Okay, sure. Well, first, thank you very much for inviting me. It's a real pleasure being at JNU, and I want to specifically thank Professor Karat for his very kind invitation. It's a real honor being here, and I look forward to your questions, your comments, and for a very interesting interactive session after my lecture. So today I will be speaking about China-US competition in South Asia, and more specifically about China's US strategy in South Asia. Now, my lecture, which would go for about 30 minutes before we turn to Q&A, is going to address primarily three questions. First, how much does the US-China competition, has the US-China competition shifted the strategies of regional states? I'll be specifically focusing on Pakistan and Bangladesh. So those of you who are more interested in Nepal, Bhutan, my apologies, but I do think that the primary focus of Chinese strategy and China-US competition in the region are Pakistan and Bangladesh. So I'll pay particular attention to these states. Also, I'll speak a little bit about the Maldives and Sri Lanka. The second question that I'm going to address is what is Beijing's response to Washington's growing engagement in the region? And the third question that my lecture is going to delve into is how India perceives the US-China competition in the region and its own role in it. Essentially, what are the implications for India of this competition? Now, let us unpack all this. First, I will introduce the competition, then China's strategy in it, and finally the implications for India. So, the US-China competition in South Asia has been a relatively recent phenomenon. Of course, I used to live in the US. There has been a substantial, disquiet in Washington, D.C. about Chinese penetration in South Asia. About 20-something years ago, an American report even developed this theory of string of pearls, a report submitted by Booz Allen Hamilton to the Department of Defense, now Department of War. So there has been a lot of American attention to Chinese penetration in South Asia, but there has been substantial pushback. Why? Because the major power in South Asia has consistently been India, and the US to a great extent relied on Indian resistance against Chinese inroads in the region. In the last couple of years, however, this changed. Why did it change? Well, because Chinese influence in the region has started to reach great levels. I'm not going to go down the list of Chinese projects in the region because I'm sure that you're all familiar with them. But I need just to point out to the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor, the potential the real and potential development of Gwadar Port, different Chinese infrastructure projects in Bangladesh, Nepal, Sri Lanka, even the Maldives, China's growing water dominance in the region, which is very much changing the water politics of South Asia. Very importantly also, Chinese influence in the last decade has increased particularly in two critically important countries. One of them is Pakistan, through the CPEC that we already discussed, and the other is Bangladesh. In the case of Pakistan, there has been a very strong bond between the Chinese military and Rawalpindi, the Pakistani military. Now about 80% of Pakistan's arms imports actually come from China. And the effect you can see last year. Essentially, the Pakistani military performed above expectations. While I do think that at the end of the conflict, India managed to gain the upper hand over Pakistan, it's a fact that Pakistan did well above expectations. And one of the reasons for this is Chinese weaponry. And not only Chinese weaponry, but also Chinese intelligence, real-time intelligence, which in modern warfare is critically important. You can see it in Iran, you can see it in Ukraine, by the way. Also, very importantly, the Chinese have enabled Pakistan to create a very unified military system, information military system. In some ways, I would argue better integrated than Pakistan's rivals. So in this sense, Chinese influence has been very critical for Pakistan, and there has been great growth in this influence. Now, when it comes down to Bangladesh, there is this perception, I think, that Bangladesh for many years had this kind of careful balancing act between Beijing and Delhi. This is true under Sheikh Hasina. However, in the last year of Sheikh Hasina's reign, it was very clear that Dhaka is leaning toward Delhi. There was great unhappiness in Beijing because of this, especially the fact that the Teesta water project was awarded to India, not to China. And just before her fall, actually, Sheikh Hasina went to Beijing, essentially begging for money, about $5 billion. The Chinese were so angry with her that they gave her, I think, the equivalent of $150 roughly million, which was practically humiliation. She left earlier, but of course, it turned out that this was a very good calculus by the Chinese because she fell 2 or 3 months later. So obviously, since the fall of the Awami League government, Chinese influence in Bangladesh has increased substantially. And while I'm one of these people who believe that China is not going to take over Bangladesh, as some people here fear, it's a fact that their lead in Bangladesh has increased substantially. So, this being said, China has also been involved in various regional cooperative initiatives, trilaterals of sorts. One of the sad truths is that in South Asia there is not a lot of interstate cooperation. SAARC, as we know, is not doing very well. All the initiatives are practically symbolic. So they have been pushing for different trilaterals, such as Afghanistan, Pakistan, China, and such as Bangladesh, Pakistan, China. So obviously this has greatly enhanced Chinese, presence in South Asia and has improved their position in the region. And of course, this has provoked a certain Indian reaction, but also very importantly, it has provoked increased American attention to the region. And you can see this in a gradual process of American re-engagement with South Asia. After the Abbottabad raid in 2011, when the American Special Forces killed Osama bin Laden, US involvement in South Asia has been going downhill for many years. While they kept on fighting in Afghanistan, their footprint there was ever smaller. However, in the last 2 or 3 years, starting with the mid-period of the Biden administration, this process started to get reversed. And of course, it has massively increased under the present Trump administration, which is even more impressive because, to put it mildly, President Trump has his plate full of things that he has to do, including Iran, including Venezuela, including Ukraine, including China, and so on. So the very fact that his administration has been able to put political capital, money, diplomacy and attention to South Asia shows you the growing importance of South Asia in the American strategic calculus. So, what has the United States done in the last couple of years? You can see with Pakistan, obviously, the engagement between President Trump and Field Marshal Asim Munir. There has been kind of a very intense relationship between them. Obviously, the United States is interested in critical minerals, the port of Pasni, crypto. They also offer to mediate the Kashmir dispute. I'm not going to delve into any of these issues because I'm sure that they are very well familiar to all of you. We can unpack them during the Q&A if you are interested in them. Also, obviously, there has been also an anti-Iran angle to this. At one point, Pakistan closed its official border crossings into Iran. Of course, I'm pretty sure that this hasn't affected greatly trade because much of it is illegal anyway. But still, it was a nice gesture toward the US. And also, there are persistent rumors that there are numerous American activities directed against Iran from Pakistani territories. At least the Iranians persistently think so, and by the way, so do the Chinese. Of course, Pakistan has also joined the Board of Peace, chaired by President Trump. So all these initiatives demonstrate Washington's growing engagement in South Asia. Of course, you can argue that many of these initiatives were a form of form of Pakistani initiative that was taken by the US. So it was Pakistan which actually knocked on US door. That's true in itself, but it's very clear also that the US was very receptive to Pakistani offers. So the result was kind of the tango that we see now between Islamabad and Washington, D.C. When it comes down to Bangladesh, there was a gradual process of improvement in relations since the fall of the Sheikh Hasina regime. First, as we all know, Chief Advisor Yunus has been, generally speaking, very US friendly. He has a lot of connections in the US. The Biden administration clearly reached out to him. There was a very major meeting at the sidelines of the UN between President Biden and Mohammed Yunus, in which the American administration fully expressed its support for the transitional government. There is also growing defense cooperation, increase in joint exercises such as Pacific Angel 25, Tiger 25, and Tiger Lightning 2025. Now, many of these military exercises have existed before, but the speed and the extent to which they have increased in the last 2 years is unprecedented. And this speaks about not only about quantitative but also qualitative change, which is very visible. By the way, surprisingly for a country which has very serious economic problems, Bangladesh has also bought American weaponry, including Black Hawk UH-60L helicopters, and in theory they're negotiating about further American hardware. And by the way, also Chinese, interestingly. But anyway, we're going to address this ticklish issue a little bit later. Of course, there is the trade agreement between the US and Bangladesh, which is very controversial, and its legality is a little bit questionable, as many of you know. But essentially, this agreement reduced the tariffs on Bangladeshi exports to 90%, gave zero tariff access to various textile manufacturers from Bangladesh who use American material, and very importantly, pushed Bangladesh to align its regulatory standards to American standards, which creates a number of problems from different Bangladeshi partners, including India and China, for that matter. Of course, we have all heard all types of conspiracy theories about Arakan corridor, about the Bay of Bengal. I'm not going to comment on these things because many of them are in the sphere of internet rumors. People speak many things. I haven't seen a lot of facts on the ground, but it's always very important to bear in mind that these rumors and these kind of conspiracy theories very often shape public opinion toward Bangladesh and Bangladesh-US cooperation. Now, when we look at Sri Lanka, which is the third country that I'm going to look at briefly, we clearly see that the US International Development Finance Corporation has invested money, about $553 million in the West Container Terminal at the Port of Colombo. And also, very interestingly, last year, the Montana National Guard signed a memorandum of understanding with Sri Lanka for the so-called Mega Ports Initiative for Port Safety, which means practically management of port facilities, which obviously has very important security considerations. Also, Sri Lanka and the US are conducting various military exercises, the most important of which is the CARAT, Cooperation of World Readiness and Training exercise. So, the most important thing that you have to understand about all these American initiatives in South Asia is that they're very much China-focused. And let me point out that this is not an implied goal. This is a stated goal of American policy. You can see it, for example, in the recent statement of the new US ambassador in Dhaka, who practically said that there is too much Chinese influence in that region. And we are going to address this. I mean, he didn't use the term "we are going to address this," but this was the meaning of his comments. So you can see this very clearly in the fact that in Pakistan the US has been interested in critical minerals, which is part of the rare earths competition between Beijing and Washington. You can see it in the recent letter to Prime Minister Rahman, newly elected Prime Minister Rahman in Bangladesh by President Trump, who spoke about jointly developing the free and open Indo-Pacific, which is a code word, of course, for resisting Chinese influence. Also, you can see it in the trade deal between the US and Bangladesh, which very importantly barred trading with no-market economies. Of course, China is one of these economies. And this can create a lot of problems for potential free trade agreement between Bangladesh and China, which is, by the way, in the process of negotiations. And also it can create potential difficulty in Bangladesh joining such China-led clubs as the RCEP, Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership. So with all this in mind, let me now move to the second part of my presentation, China's reaction to this US engagement and China's strategy in South Asia. So on the Chinese internet, for those of us who speak Mandarin, kind of follow the discussion on the Chinese internet, there has been a ferocious reaction to many of these things. People have been speaking about Pakistani or Bangladeshi betrayal. There were articles about Pakistan stabbing China in the back. Hu Xijin, for example, the kind of a hyper-nationalist hawk, and former editor of the Global Times, even published an article how practically Pakistan has joined Washington's efforts to compete on rare earths with China. So there has been a very strong reaction on the Chinese internet and among some parts of the Chinese commentariat and strategic community. However, the official Chinese reaction has been actually very restrained. and very calm. Of course, they are aware of the problem, but they have strongly dismissed criticism of the cooperation between China and Pakistan and China and Bangladesh. And of course, I want here to stress that their focus on Pakistan is much bigger than on Bangladesh, simply put because Pakistan is a much closer partner, even ally of China compared to Bangladesh. The Chinese are not paying so much attention to Bangladesh, also to a great extent because Bangladesh is smaller, obviously it doesn't have nuclear weapons, it doesn't have the same economic, the same political and strategic importance. Obviously it's not a physical neighbor of China, they don't have a border, and very importantly also Pakistan, very crucially, is kind of a source of Chinese access to the Indian Ocean. So for all these reasons, most of the attention on American efforts in South Asia has been on Pakistan and China, not so much on Bangladesh. Of course, the Chinese have been aware that American activities have been designed to weaken Chinese influence. The MOFA spokesman, the spokesman of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, described claims that there is a rift between China and Pakistan as designed to drive a wedge between Islamabad and Beijing. In a very interesting Global Times piece by one of the leading China specialists, Zhang Chaozhi, who is a professor of Pakistan Studies at Sichuan University, one of the major kind of Pakistan scholars in China, it was there was a commentary that the schemes of third parties seek to decouple Pakistan from China under the guise of deepening cooperation. It was very clear that this was directed at the US, although Washington was never mentioned in the article. It's very likely that this type of article has been very carefully vetted and prepared in advance. On Bangladesh, China has, generally speaking, renounced US comments about, for example, US concerns about drone manufacturing facilities, for example, in Bangladesh, which have been a major source of tensions. Actually, the US ambassador recently even had comments about drone manufacturing, Chinese drone manufacturing on Bangladesh territory, which, by the way, is not very far away from the border with India. And China has denounced these comments, but has not responded in any strong ways. It has in turn drawn attention to American actions which are not conducive to Bangladesh's stability. So what are China's concerns behind this rhetoric? It's very clear that there is a certain Chinese unease in all this. One aspect of this is, of course, the question of the security of the China-Pakistan economic corridor and of Chinese projects in Bangladesh. And security not in the sense that the US is going to attack these facilities, but in terms of intelligence, because it's very likely that quite a few of these facilities are dual use and probably they have security sensitive functions. So obviously growing American presence, for example at the port of Pasni and so on, might have ramifications for this. It might also be used potentially for kind of monitoring Chinese activities in Afghanistan, even in Xinjiang potentially. Obviously also it means loss of Chinese leverage over Pakistan and Bangladesh, and you can see this very clearly with Islamabad. Clearly, Islamabad now is in a much better position vis-a-vis China than it used to be 2 or 3 years ago, because before a very bankrupt Pakistan, which is practically lumbering from one financial crisis to another, had nobody to turn to but China. Now it has another source of funding, which is the US, and of course the US-led international system, including the IMF. Of course, there is another element, the potential American military presence in Pakistan. Now, whether there will be such presence, whether there won't be, it's a very open question. Some people have argued that there is already an American military presence in Pakistan of some form, for example, at the Nur Khan Air Base. It's very difficult to say this. There are a lot of rumors, but there is clearly a Chinese sensitivity to this whole issue. So, it's very important, however, not to exaggerate those Chinese concerns. US presence in Pakistan is not a new thing. Actually, the Chinese developed much of the China-Pakistan economic corridor with American presence nearby in Afghanistan and actually in parts of Pakistan, some of it unofficial, but we all know that it existed massively. Bangladesh is very much dependent on Chinese trade and investment, and it's very unlikely that the United States is going to gain the upper hand in this respect. Simply put, it's very difficult to convince American companies to practically burn their money in Balochistan, in a very insecure and very unstable region. The Chinese are willing to do this, simply put, because this is government policy. And the Chinese government has various ways of making Chinese business go to places where it wouldn't go otherwise. In the much more democratic and freewheeling American system, even under President Trump, this is dramatically more difficult. And of course, other Chinese projects, connectivity projects, and projects, let's say in Sri Lanka, port projects, are still on the ground. So the Chinese are concerned, but they are by no means scared of what is happening. So, based on all this, what is the Chinese strategy and Chinese reaction to all this? I would argue that China has practically decided to take no immediate actions and to continue its previous policies vis-a-vis both Bangladesh and Pakistan, and to a lesser extent other South Asian countries. You can see this with the announcement of the stage 2 of the China-Pakistan economic corridor, which was planned for quite a while. You can see it with submarine deliveries under contract by China to Pakistan, to the Pakistan military, Pakistan Navy. You can see it in Chinese support for Pakistan's proposal for kind of multilateral landing for a very key railway project known as ML1, from Karachi to Peshawar. You can see it in Bangladesh. They have pledged to invest $2.1 billion. They have offered duty-free access to Bangladeshi products until 2028. They have actually sold tanks to light tanks, to Bangladesh, and they are probably in talks to export different aircraft, including J-10C and JF-17 aircraft to Bangladesh. So many of these initiatives were in place before American engagement in South Asia reached the levels that you see now, which practically speaks about very substantial continuity in Chinese policy vis-a-vis South Asia, and particularly vis-a-vis Pakistan and Bangladesh. By the way, you can see this also in Sri Lanka, where Sinopec announced a $3.7 billion refinery project at Hambantota. So, how do we interpret this Chinese behavior? There are several ways to interpret it. One is simply put regarded as a form of strategic patience. Essentially, this strategic patience is based on the idea that American involvement will decline over time. You can see this line of thinking in prominent Chinese authors such as Jin Sanrong, who is teaching at People's University Renmin Daxue in Beijing, who is kind of a very prominent and very kind of old-fashioned member of China's strategic community, generally speaking very critical of India. You can see it also in various publications. For example, I recently encountered a publication in Liberation Daily, which is the mouthpiece of the People's Liberation Army, about this. Then another interpretation of Chinese behavior is the Chinese competing but doing so quietly. Essentially, they don't want to provoke a US and Indian reaction. So why respond in an obvious and strong way against this American offensive, if we can call it that way, if you can do so in a quiet and kind of more meticulous way, especially if you believe that time is on your side. And a third possibility is that there are actually some benefits for China from all this. Why do I think so? Think about it. The more US involvement there is in South Asia, the more trouble there will be in US-India relations, because I really don't think that India is happy with all this. Also, because we spoke about Pakistan a little bit earlier, China has been very exacerbated with Pakistan and constant Pakistani begging for money. Practically, they are very happy that now Pakistan has another patron that it can try to milk for more money, which of course they're going to squander, and then they come back and ask for more. So in a perverse sense, one can argue that all this has certain benefits for China. So, with all this, what is actually China's strategy? I would argue that China's strategy is broadly based on continuing its course in the last several years towards South Asia. I believe that China thinks that it holds enduring advantages over the US, economic, connectivity advantages, political advantages. Also, I think that Beijing is very well aware that the policies of many South Asian countries are not so much based on the benefits that they can derive from the US or from China, but on opposition to India. And when you in South Asia want to be opposed to India, you turn to China. You don't turn to the same level to the US, because obviously the US and India share a partnership of sorts. And this partnership puts some limitations to how much you can use Washington against Delhi. On the contrary, with Beijing, you can be their guest, they'll enjoy it, they'll connect you with Pakistan, which they do, by the way. You can see it in Bangladesh very clearly. So it's a way to go for the Chinese, so to speak, as they say on Wall Street. So what does all this mean for India? What are the implications for India? That's the third part of my presentation. It means four things. First, it clearly reduces Delhi's leverage on South Asian countries. I'm not speaking about Pakistan, because obviously Pakistan is a special case. Indian leverage on Pakistan is very limited, as practically the whole history of their relationship demonstrates, but it's definitely true for Bangladesh, it's definitely true for Sri Lanka, it's definitely true for the Maldives. I think that for Nepal and Bhutan, things are a little bit more complex. Bhutan is very small and doesn't have official relations, as you know, with China. Nepal is first in a process of transition right now, and second, being sandwiched geographically between China and India, and having, by the way, a small Tibetan community. It's in a very, very specific situation. So that's why I'm not looking at Nepal very carefully here. So once South Asian countries can play China and the US one against the other, of course, this improves their leverage vis-a-vis Delhi and makes it much more difficult for Delhi to manage them. The second implication of this China-US competition in South Asia is that it complicates India's relations with Washington. We can see this very clearly in growing Indian unease about US presence in Bangladesh. There are all types of rumors about military presence in the Bay of Bengal and so on, but even if those rumors are inaccurate, it's very clear that India feels very uncomfortable. And I think that India is increasingly starting to face the fact that the US is not only a partner against China, but also a rival, a competitor of sorts in India's own neighborhood. And as you know very well, historically South Asia has been very heavily dominated by India. The third, ironically, there is also positive side to all this. More US-China competition in South Asia means that China's own position in South Asia is weaker, simply put because the much more powerful US is willing to push against Beijing's influence. So if you have to choose whose influence you want to grow in South Asia among your competitors, I think that most people in Delhi would choose US's versus China's. So in this sense, it comes with certain benefits for India. Finally, fourth, I think that obviously the competition strengthens Pakistan's position versus India. You can see this very clearly last year during the conflict in May between India and Pakistan, but more broadly you can see it in dynamics of the India-Pakistan relationship in the last year. Simply put, Pakistan now can import weaponry, can get financial aid, can get international support both from Beijing and Washington, which is practically the sweet spot where they want to be. They have consistently throughout their history wanted to be in this position. So how long this will last is a different question. In general, the Pakistanis tend to overpromise and underdeliver, so I suspect that at some point there will be a moment of disappointment, but at least until then they will be able to kind of exploit both parties. And finally, fifth, the US-China competition in South Asia has the potential to shift the international relations of South Asia, a region that, as you know very well, has been historically very much dominated by India, or at the very least, India has had a very preeminent position in this region. Now, please do not misunderstand me. The China-India competition in South Asia remains the most important competition in the region. I'm not claiming that the US is the on the same level of importance as India and China in the region. It's not. However, the US-China competition in South Asia, I think, is the new developing story. And if this story develops over time, I believe that it has the potential to transform the international relations of the region. So this was my presentation. Thank you very much, and I look forward to your thoughts, comments, and questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Jnu, for your insights on this region in South Asia where China and Eurasia have competitive interest. At the same time, you have given some insights regarding what are the implications for India when we get that. It is very inevitable that US and China will be in the region, and somehow even the South Asian countries will get some benefits, or this rivalry is much like that's inevitably that India has to accept this US or China position. So as we have gone through the history, put up this particular region was very instable, and even today, though we have geographical with the border, somehow this region is stable, but still the dimensions have got to change actually. So from the economic connectivity to the critical minerals and all this. So I hope that this intellectual revolution will continue with the questions, because the students or the scholars have also many questions and doubts, so they may ask, and I hope that even we respond to these all curious comments and questions. So shall we? Okay, hello, please, anyone?